morning. Welcome back to day 3 of our daily devotions, where today we're going to be asking ourselves the question, who is God really? Now, it's an important question. As we look around us at the world in which we inhabit, its complexity, its diversity, it's not long before we ask the inevitable questions, where did it all come from? What does it tell us? How does it all work? Who could have started the process of life? As modern Westerners, we see a world that we now understand is governed by complex laws of physics, chemistry, biology, and mathematics. But our ancient ancestors have always been able to appreciate these mysterious powers at work around us, long before they had names for them or scientific understanding of how they worked. Ancient peoples across the globe came up with varied explanations for how the world came to be. And that was based on the conclusions that they drew from what could be observed. These are the early expressions of science, which is the study of the nature and the behavior of all things. And also philosophy, the study of the nature of wisdom and knowledge. But also of something else governing all human knowledge. There is a common thread of thought present deep within all humanity that a being or beings far greater than themselves must have created it all for a purpose. Thus, theology, the study of the nature of God, has existed since the very first thoughts rattled around in the heads of humans, trying to make sense of their existence in this world. Now, there are a number of experiences that have always influenced our thinking about God. Firstly, there's our observations and the conclusions that we have drawn from all of our interactions with the natural world. One of Jesus' early disciples, called Paul, puts it this way in the New Testament book of Romans in the Bible. He says this, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what he has made, so that people are without excuse." Then there's the fact that in all of human history, people have observed events that they believe to be the interaction of a deity or deities with human beings. Different people drew wildly different conclusions about God from these experiences, as is evidenced from the passages like the one in Leviticus chapter 20, where God speaks to the Israelites, warning them not to draw the same conclusions about him as those who thought he demanded child sacrifices, like the people who worshipped a god called Molech. This is what God said. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, any Israelite or any foreigner residing in Israel who sacrifices any of his children to Molech is to be put to death. The members of the community are to stone him. I myself will set my face against him and will cut him off from his people. For by sacrificing his children to Molech, he has defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name." Another experience that has shaped our thinking, human thinking about God, is the internal experience of having a personal inner spirituality and a conscience. Humans have a religious nature, as is evidenced by the common human tendency to worship, even if that's in ways that are vastly different from one another. We also draw many conclusions about what God must be like from the feelings we get in our gut, those senses of right and wrong, and the question that they naturally pose for ourselves whenever we have a crisis of conscience is, where do we get our sense of good and evil from, our belief in justice, and our desire to pay homage to the deity or deities that preside as judges over us? We often feel that doing something is right, even if it doesn't benefit us personally, or wrong, even if it would. Paul, the disciple of Jesus that I mentioned earlier, he writes about the fact that although the Jews and the Greeks, for example, had very different religious practices and beliefs about God, they both acted according to an inner law that we call the conscience. This is how Paul put it. Paul says, "Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law," he's talking about the Jewish law, "when they do by nature things required by the law, they are a law unto themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them." So nature, the stories people throughout history have told of interactions with deities, and our various expressions of an internal human spirituality and conscience all point us towards these important conclusions. There is a divine being, or perhaps beings, that are powerful enough to have shaped the world around us, wise enough to manage the world's complexity, imaginative enough to create its diversity, and that our actions are known and judged by him, her, or them according to the internal laws that we have all been given and we call the conscience. After all of this, we have to accept that there's still a lot of mystery remaining about God. We can reflect on numerous aspects of God's nature, but we can't really claim to know him personally or to understand his character or his purposes for us from this theology. In order to know a God of infinite power, wisdom, imagination, and whose judgments are clearly higher than our own, we would need that God to reveal much more of himself to us. We would need him to show us his personality and his character and to tell us his plans and his purposes. And Christians believe that's exactly what God has done. But that's tomorrow's subject. We've already got more than enough to reflect on this morning as we consider the mystery of who God is. Why not take some time this morning to reflect on what the natural world might tell you about him? Take some time to get in touch with your own inner voice, crying out for meaning and purpose, and to consider what that voice might be trying to tell you about God. Think about your conscience. What does that tell you about how God has designed you and what kind of life he designed you for? My prayer for you today is that even these general concepts of theology will enhance your desire to know this mysterious God who gives life and meaning to everything around us. In the link in the description below, you will find a link to a great song that I've picked to kind of go along with this, and I hope that you would enjoy that this morning as well. God bless you.